Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Your Voice, Your Future. I'm your moderator tonight, Armstrong Williams. We're so honored to have the governor of the great state of Maryland, the Honorable Wes Moore, joining us tonight. Governor, welcome back to our broadcast.
It's great to be back with you. Great to be back with you. Happy President's Day.
It is a President's Day, but you and I work. You know, in preparation for tonight, the Baltimore Sun, which I'm a proud co-owner of, we asked people to submit questions to you for tonight's show. And one of the constant questions that came in was these horror stories of someone who said their utility electric bill was $300 a month, and now it's $800 a month. It was $150 a month, it's $500 a month. And you know, it's interesting because, you know, when you're governor, they believe you are a miracle worker. And everything that affects them and impacts them, especially their economy, the governor can do something about it. Is this more of a Baltimore gas, electric, B&G issue? Why is all of a sudden, not only has their electricity bill soared, but they're also saying there's increase in their real estate taxes, which places an unusual burden on them?
Yeah, I mean, yes, the bills are coming from BGE, not from the state, but it's still something that that is outrageous for a lot of folks, and even for myself, when you're looking at those kind of increases. I think the big challenge that we continue to see is there's a supply and demand issue, is that we continue to watch an increased demand for more energy, for more supports, and we have not been investing long-term, whether it's PJM or otherwise who are in charge of this, to actually increase supply. And so it's the reason that I've actually personally introduced legislation in this legislative session, and we're going to work with the General Assembly to address the issue of increased supply, having alternative energy assets and options, but also making sure that we're giving a little bit of relief to the ratepayer. Because for the ratepayer, for the person who's trying to understand why are my bills from BGE continuing to increase, frankly, they need to have a better answer, and we needed to be able to do more to actually fulfill the grid, to have more energy options that people can tap into, because the demand is not going to go down. As you're watching increased population, as you're watching new industries that are coming on board, demand is not going to decrease. So we have to make sure that supply increases in order to help to actually match that. Is nuclear energy an option? Absolutely. Nuclear energy is a clean energy option. And I think we need to look at this as all these energy options that are being presented are things that have to be explored, that we can say we both believe in clean energy, and by the way, and again, nuclear is clean energy option, that we can believe in a clean energy future for the state of Maryland, and also say that we've got to do what it takes right now to make sure that our ratepayers are going to be protected, that we're increasing energy options for the people, and that we can do it in both a fiscally responsible and a way that also protects the environment. You don't have to choose between those things. So the things that you just stated, what assurances, if any, do you think there is any kind of possibility that the electric bill will reduce as a result of what you're asking with the legislature? And also the real estate taxes. Will everyday Marylanders see a decrease in their cost of living? Well, those are two separate things. Yes, of course. And one, if you're looking at property taxes, we're proud of the fact that this is the third year in a row during my entire administration that we have introduced a budget that has no increases in property taxes, because we understand that you are not going to, especially at a time like now, where we are so focused, and I'm so focused, on making sure we can decrease the economic strain that's sitting on middle-class families, that we've gone and introduced a budget for the third year in a row does not increase property taxes, because we didn't believe that this budget, it was required or necessary for that. On the energy side, I know we are working in coordination with places like BGE, who have continued to provide assets and information, but the truth is that the bills that people are getting from BGE, that I know BGE is continuing to work to address the issue of the high prices that are coming on board, but it's also going to be up to the General Assembly, and knowing that we're going to work in coordination with them to be able to increase energy assets, but make sure this is not done on the backs of ratepayers. Governor Moore, when former Governor Larry Hogan
left office, it is stated that he left a $5 billion surplus. I know you've heard this argument.
Yep.
Now, when he said he took office, he inherited a $5 billion budget deficit. Some people ask Governor Moore, where did the money go? Was it wise to grow the state government so quickly? And what about Hogan's claim that he left you a surplus? But you said that isn't necessarily the total story. Explain your story.
Yeah, well, listen, I don't deal in political talking points. I deal in data. I deal in math. I come from a business background, and so I don't do the political talking points. The math is very clear, is that we inherited a structural deficit that has been projected and predicted literally ever since 2007.
What is a structural deficit?
It basically means that it's not one-time cash. It's Maryland had a real problem. The problem was that we were spending more. So if you look at the 7 years before I became the governor, Maryland's spending increased by 70%, 7-0. But the GDP growth in the state of Maryland grew at 3%. The average state in this country grew by 11%. So Maryland was growing, our economy was growing lower than half of the national average, but our spending increased by 70%. That means you then have a structural deficit, right? It basically, if you take a look at a household, if I'm making $100 a month, but I'm spending $500 a month on my credit card, you are creating a deficit. And so what happened during the COVID years was you had this influx of cash that came on board from the federal government where they gave billions of dollars to every single state. And so you saw states now with cash that was sitting on the balance sheet, but that was not structural. That was one-time cash. And so when we thought about the uses of one-time cash, when we came on board, we wanted to make sure that we had a strong buffer for the rainy day fund. It's the reason that the recommended rainy day fund we had was for 5%. The budget I just introduced is at 8% for the rainy day. So I wanted to make sure we had a strong rainy day fund. We needed to make sure that we were cleaning up a lot of the liabilities that we inherited. So for example, things like Charlotte Hall, which is a veterans home inside of the state of Maryland that was just had chronic abuse challenges and issues that we knew we had to address. Things like the boondoggle of the Purple Line, the mass transit line in suburban Washington, D.C. That was a disaster that we then had to come and fix. Things like State Center, that we wanted to say this had to be something that was a long-term problem, but it was our responsibility to fix it. And so we were able to use the one-time capital going towards that, but that still did not address the structural deficit. So now, but I'll say this though, but the thing that does become important in that is I'm not a person who wants to spend time focusing on the past. That's why everything that we are driving on, I'm not about pointing blame. I'm not about pointing fingers at other people. I want to point fingers towards the future and to say, what are we doing to fix the fact that if you look at the budget that I presented, we have taken in our proposed budget, essentially was a $3 billion structural deficit and turned it into a $150 million structural surplus. That is what our proposed budget does.
So what do you say to your critics that you're facing this budget crisis? You've created 3,000 new jobs. The legislature has created 2,000 new jobs, 5,000 jobs. Wouldn't it just been better not to create those jobs and that money would have gone towards the deficit that you're facing?
Oh, we create a whole lot more jobs than that, because you're talking about jobs of people who came to the state government. But I'm talking about the fact that we've created 5x of that of people who've actually created new jobs in the state of Maryland. I'm talking about the fact that we're now talking about tens of thousands of jobs that have been created in the state of Maryland since I've become the governor. Remember, when I became the governor, Maryland was 43rd in the country in unemployment. 43rd. Now Maryland is going on 15 straight months of amongst the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country. 43rd to now being amongst the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country. And there are things that we did. We invested in things like childcare and making sure you're investing in getting people back into the workforce, particularly women back into the workforce, because you cannot have a situation where you have a parent who's choosing between, is my child going to be okay, or can I go back to my job? That we invested in things like job training and apprenticeship program. And I said, this is going to be a state that while we have some of the best four-year colleges in America, we are going to end this myth that every single one of our students must attend one of them in order to be economically successful. And we have quadrupled the amount of people in apprenticeship programs and trade programs, programs that do not need a college degree, because we've gotten rid of this myth that everybody needs one. And what has that done? It's driven historically low unemployment rates within the state of Maryland. So this is not just about making sure that we're filling vacancies within state government and making sure that basic functions that were not being performed, unemployment insurance, law enforcement, that I thought it was important to make sure we can get more cops in the street. It was more important that we get more firefighters. It was more important that we can get people who pick up the phone if you needed help with your unemployment insurance. But also, the vast majority of jobs that have been created during my administration have not been government jobs. These have been private sector jobs.
You know, you initially did not blame Republicans or Governor Hogan for the budget deficit, but that changed this past year. Why did you not alert citizens of these budget problems when you took office? And at what point does your administration take ownership of the budget dilemma the state currently faces?
Well, first, to be clear, I don't blame nobody I don't blame people. I don't point fingers. That's not what I've ever done. It wasn't what I did when I led soldiers in combat. It wasn't what I did when I worked in finance, when I ran a small business. It wasn't what I did when I ran one of the largest poverty-fighting organizations in this country. I don't point fingers. I fix things. And so the thing that we knew, and the thing that, by the way, I talked about, in fact, the Baltimore Sun reported on it. Even prior to my inauguration, I talked about the fiscal crisis and the structural deficit. This is not a new thing. I was talking about this when I was governor-elect. I was talking before I became the governor.
You're cutting $2 billion from the state's budget this year.
Yeah.
Why was this such a priority for you?
Well, because listen, I think again, I come from the business world. Mm-hmm. And there's two ways you prompt growth. Because for me, the North Star is growth. That's what this is all about. We have got to grow this economy because for the years before I became the governor, our economy had just stalled. We did not have a business mindset. We did not have a growth mindset. And so if you want to create growth, there's two things you have to do. And I know this from my world, in my experience in the business world. You need to increase your top line, and you need to control your spending. Increase top line, control your spend. That's how you are able to create growth. And so part of the reason is, one of the core indicators of that is you've got to control your spend. So I was able to look at everything we were able to do and say, tell me two things. Is it effective? And is it sustainable? If it was effective and sustainable, we would invest.
How are you going to do that? I know your budget for the state is about $62.2 billion. I mean, $2 billion, it doesn't seem like a lot. But who bears the brunt of the $2 billion deficit that you're going to cut? Who will that follow? Will people who are already suffering pay part of the price? Is it the wealth class? How do you plan to balance that out?
But also remember, too, that this is the third year in a row that we've introduced a budget where the general fund is smaller than the year before. People forget that. Like, we've now introduced 3 straight budgets that are smaller than the year before. I've actually decreased the size of budget, decreased the size of government since I have been the governor. Not increased, decreased 3 straight years. And so when we talk about the things that we made adjustments on, again, was it sustainable and was it effective? If it was sustainable and effective, it got funded. If it was not sustainable or effective, or in some cases, neither sustainable nor effective, I was going to cut it.
And some examples of what that was unsustainable and you cut.
So, for example, you look at some of the tax credits that we have laid out. These things that were just happening automatically. I look at things like whether it's an enterprise tax cut or some of these tax cuts that have been there involved for a long time, where I'm looking at the data, and the data is not showing any measure of statewide efficacy. So if you can't show me that something is effective, I need data. Data moves me. I don't move without data. And if I'm looking at the data, and we went line by line on every single aspect, and if you cannot show me that it was something that was actually working for the people and was sustainable, that it was not something that made it inside of the budget.
Hold that point. Governor Wes Moore is our guest, and you can tell he's on fire. We'll be back. Don't go away. We welcome back the Honorable Wes Moore, Governor of the state of Maryland, is our exclusive guest tonight. You know, you talk about data. You know, the Office of Government Efficiency, known as DOGE, has been cleaning house, finding a lot of waste and fraudulent behavior. How does the state of Maryland respond to what Elon Musk has been tasked to do? How does that impact Maryland? How do you work for it to make sure, because you talk about accountability and responsibility here in your own state?
I say I believe in accountability. And that's why, if you look at just months ago, you know, I signed an executive order focusing on, called the Government Modernization Initiative, where it was exclusively about making sure we are cutting government waste and making things more efficient within the state of Maryland. And we focused on things like on IT consolidation and fleet management, understanding why if you went to go work for one department in the state of Maryland and I work for another department, why are we paying two different prices for our laptops, right? So saying like, find me the inefficiencies and make sure we can cut costs on that, on everything from procurement reform and how we're thinking about real estate reform. And we know that in just the first year alone, we're gonna save Marylanders tens of millions of dollars just in waste and cutting waste and efficiencies, right? So we know how to do this work when it comes to government efficiency. The thing that we have to make sure that we are seeing, though, is frankly, some of the things that we are seeing from DOGE is not about being able to take a scalpel to government efficiencies. We are seeing how entire federal agencies are being slashed. We're seeing how thousands of workers are being laid off. We know this week alone, they're talking about over 1,100 workers from FEMA being laid off. There is not the amount of disciplined data that is being put into these decisions. And this does affect us.
So you believe process is important?
I believe process is important. Mm-hmm. And I believe in efficiency. And I believe if things are not efficient, you got to get rid of it, and you got to move quickly to get rid of it. But I also believe this is not about making wide hacks. I actually think that when people say we're just going to cut 10% of this or 15% of that, I think that's lazy governing. I think really smart governing is when you're actually able to drill deep, to know what's going on, and then make swift decisions. And it does impact us directly, because I think about, for the state of Maryland, we have over 160,000 federal employees in our state. And that doesn't even include the contractors. That does not include the uniform personnel. So this is something that Maryland has a distinct connection to what happens in the federal government. I am all about finding efficiencies. I am all about making sure that we are modernizing the way the government works. I also know that it needs to be done smartly, and it needs to be done in a way that is transparent.
Will you instruct Maryland officials here in the state to cooperate in the president's and Tom Homan's plan to work with ICE to clean up the issues in the immigration crisis that the country faces? I know you saw where they filed this lawsuit against the governor and the attorney general of New York. How do you balance that out in trying to respect the goals of this administration and also understand that every state is unique in its own way?
Yeah, well, I mean, and one, I'm glad you phrased it the way you did, because this is a crisis, and it's been a crisis for a very long time. And I say that knowing that this is personal for me. I come from an immigrant family. I was raised by an immigrant single mom. So I feel this crisis very personally. And I know that it's something that Congress has got to do their job. There is no executive order that the president can sign that is going to fix the immigration crisis. Do you know why? Because the president is not responsible for it. It's Congress's job to be able to fix this, and I think Congress needs to prioritize it in a way that we have not prioritized it and not gotten a bill signed and done. Now, I will say this, though. The thing and the instructions that I give to the people of our state and the instructions that I give to our local jurisdictions, what I'm hoping our local jurisdictions do is they have got to follow the Constitution. The Constitution is very clear on this about the role and the responsibility of immigration policy and enforcement. That is a federal role, and that our job is not to take over the federal role, but our job is also not to impugn it either. We have got to follow the Constitution, and that's exactly the orders and the instructions that I've given to all of our state agencies.
You know, the Senate president believes that Maryland can need an additional $1.5 billion in spending cuts beyond the $2 billion you've already planned. Are you prepared, Governor, to make further cuts if necessary?
Yeah, I'm first of all, I'm going to work with the legislature, both Democrats and Republicans, to make sure that we can, for the third year in a row, have a balanced budget that we'll be able to pass and get done. And I'm also prepared to work with them to present more cuts. I think people need to be serious about this situation that we're in right now, right? We are watching a situation where in just months, we've watched thousands of Marylanders lose their jobs for no reason. That we have watched a situation now where we have watched the price of goods, the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, we have watched it continue to increase, unemployment increase, right? The stock market increase, but we have watched no relief for the people of our individual jurisdictions. We are watching things like, we are watching not just the shuttering of federal agencies, we are watching things like a fear of Medicaid cuts. We're watching the fear of what could happen to Maryland's unique healthcare model. So this is a very, very serious time in our state, and a time when people are scared about what they are seeing. And so yes, we have to be prepared to do more cuts to be able to accommodate for that.
In your State of the State address, you spoke about the crisis facing men and young boys, which I was struck by. You have this juvenile justice, you have your juvenile crime, you have the petty crime. It does seem that a lot of young boys are in crisis. From your experiences, what is happening, and how is your administration addressing it, working to solve this crisis, to protect families and also to protect our future, these kids?
And and this is a personal one for me. I mean, I had handcuffs on my wrist when I was 11 years old. I'm a kid who watched my dad die in front of me when I was 3 because he didn't get the health care he needed. I had a mom who did not get her first job that gave her benefits until I was 14 years old. I joined the Army when I was 17. This crisis that's happening for so many young boys, it's not just real, it's very personal for me. And the thing that I knew is I had people who were willing to give me a second chance. And people who are willing to make a second chance actually mean something. And so when I say that this is going to be a moment when you look at the data, and we cannot turn a blind eye to this data. The fact that whether you're talking about mental health, whether you're talking about the criminal justice system, whether you're talking about educational attainment, whether you're talking about labor force participation, that we have young men that are moving in the absolute wrong direction.
And you got to include the family in here.
100%.
Yes.
Well, and I think the family is a huge part of it, because the best way that you can make sure you are raising strong men and boys by making sure they're coming up in a strong, supportive home. The best way you can help that home is make sure that home exists in a strong, supportive community.
And they need fathers. They need men.
They do, right? But you know what they also need? We also need to make sure that we have the supports in place, because we cannot punish young boys simply because of the situation.
How are you defining the support in place?
Well, that's why we're doing things like the investments that we're making in apprenticeship programs and trade programs and getting people into the workforce. That's why in my proposed budget, we propose funding for additional juvenile facilities, like the one we have in Catoctin over in Western Maryland, or the new additional one in Baltimore City, because we need to have additional places for support, that when you're watching a young person who is repeatedly showing that they are in some of the most troubling situations and offending the law, that the answer cannot simply be, well, either send them home or send them to an adult facility.
Well, don't we have that now?
No.
Don't we spend so much money on that now? And what do we have to show for it?
We have watched, in the years before I became the governor, we watched how we shuttered our juvenile facilities. I believe at least 6 juvenile facilities were closed. So if you don't have facilities, if you don't have places where where our young people, particularly our young people who are repeat offenders, particularly young people that are dealing with substance abuse, where they do not have a place to go, then what option was there for them besides either send them home or send them to an adult facility?
Some Republican lawmakers released a response claiming that your budget does not address Maryland's long-term financial challenges. How do you respond?
I say I didn't look at their response because they didn't have a plan.
Well, they argue that your administration, let me go a little deeper here, that there are some critics argue that your administration has not taken enough action to address youth crime, with homicides down, but petty crime still an issue. How are you and your administration tackling this?
Well, one again, I will say I will work with anybody, Democrats or Republicans. And while I appreciate people making statements, what I really would appreciate more is a plan, because we have not seen a plan that they've actually proposed. But in addition to that, I'll say this, is that while I am very, very encouraged by the momentum we've been able to see in the state of Maryland, and it's not just homicides, and it's not just the fact that we've watched a historic drop in homicides across the state, historic drops in non-fatal shootings, that Maryland now has amongst the most precipitous drops of violent crime anywhere in the entire country. We're now seeing year-on-year drops on everything from carjackings to auto thefts. So it's not just the violent crime, it's also the other petty crimes that people are dealing with. That we're watching real momentum, and momentum that's very encouraging. But the thing I know is this, we're not done. Because as long as there is anybody who is feeling unsafe in their neighborhood, as long as there's anybody who's feeling like my neighborhood does not see me nor support me, then I know we're not done. And that's why the partnership and the resources that we are putting together, are historic numbers. We put historic numbers, historic funding into things like local law enforcement, historic funding into things like technology assets and information sharing all across our jurisdictions, so we can increase the closure rate. So if a person commits a crime in the state of Maryland, you have got only but amount of hours before we are going to catch you and prosecute you. So these are the type of things when we're showing people we are not playing and we are taking this very seriously, and the results are showing, but we're not done.
Let's deal with the elephant in the room. We've not mentioned his name, the Donald. But I want to ask about President Trump in a different way, because I saw the footage of you with the governor with the president in Annapolis. It was very warm, which shows that you're willing to reach out because you're the governor of Maryland. Yeah. And whomever the president of the United States is, you got to work with them. It's a lot of power, they have resources. With that being said, how do you work with this administration on places that you can grow the state of Maryland for the benefit of Marylanders?
And listen, I'm going to be with the president this week. I mean, we'll be at the president later on this week with all the other governors for the National Governors Association, because I fight on behalf of the 6.5 million people who call themselves Marylanders. I'll fight for my people, always. And I don't care, and I will work with anybody who is willing to protect the rights and the values and the freedoms and the future for the people of my state. And there's a tremendous amount of work that we can, and I hope that we can do with this federal
administration. Do you think this president is willing to protect those things that you just mentioned? Is he that type president?
I'm going to work with anybody to be able to make sure that the people of my state are protected and the futures for the people of my state can be realized. And that includes everything from how we're focusing on infrastructure builds and transportation builds inside the state of Maryland. That includes everything from how we're making sure we're supporting healthcare and the healthcare needs. It includes things like what are we doing to drive down costs. It's the reason that I'm very proud that not just within the legislature, but the work that we're doing, we're focusing on things like making prescription drugs more affordable, making housing more affordable.
But what you're saying to Maryland right now, it doesn't matter. You're going to work with Donald Trump.
What I'm saying to Maryland is I'm always going to have Marylanders' backs. And I will work with anybody who is going to make sure that Marylanders are protected and their hopes are fulfilled, their rights are protected, and that their future and their dreams are going to be secured.
And that's Donald Trump.
That I will work with anybody.
Okay.
Anybody.
Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll be back. So, I want to, I saw a Wall Street Journal headline, Governor, and I want people to, I want to read this to you. They said, the Wall Street Journal referred to your administration as the Californication of Maryland. In other words, they were saying that you've become the Gavin Newsom of Maryland. And I was a little surprised, and when I saw it, I said, let me see what the governor, how does he respond to that?
That's a dumb headline. It's a dumb headline. It's stupid. Because it's stupid for a bunch of different reasons. One, that when you looked at what happened inside the article, there's nothing factual about it, because if you were looking at how we wanted to focus on economic growth, because the biggest challenge we've had within the state of Maryland is we have not had economic growth, that we've had an economy that has just stayed flat. And so you've got to be able to create mechanisms of economic growth. You've got to make it more attractive for businesses to be able to come. You've got to be able to spurn our entrepreneurs and be able to support them. And so that's why the plan that we have put together does some basic things. It makes it easier for people to do business inside of the state of Maryland. It does procurement reform and making sure that the billions of dollars that Maryland spends every single year, that they should be used with Maryland businesses to be able to support our entrepreneurs and our inventors and our investors, that it does things like making sure we can invest in industries of the future and places where we're uniquely capable of winning in. So that includes things like life sciences, that includes AI and quantum and cyber, that includes things like aerospace and defense, because we have all the assets in the state of Maryland, but we have not been investing in them. And it says we need to start investing in them. And it says we need to reform a tax code to be able to give the people, the middle-class families in our state, to give them a little extra breathing room. And that's why our tax plan, that for 82% of Marylanders will either see a cut or see no change at all inside of their tax rate. So the headline is stupid. And it also goes back to the fact that, listen, I'm going to fight for middle-class families. I'm going to fight for working-class families. I'm going to make sure that they're okay. The Wall Street Journal can fight for who they want to fight for.
So let me go to, the Baltimore Sun. We have online viewers who have their own questions. This is an interesting one. Will you instruct Public Service Commission to protect the interests of landowners in 3 counties from having their land taken away?
Yeah, well first, with the way the PSC, the Public Service Commission, is structured, I can't instruct them. They're an independent agency. So the governor nor anybody else cannot instruct.
Do you appoint them?
That we appoint them, but I cannot instruct them. So I do want to be clear on that.
But you can influence them.
I do want to be clear that there are legal limitations.
I understand, but you have power. You're the governor.
There are legal limitations as to what a governor can do or instruct and still remain within the bounds of the law.
But you're going to fight for the people of Maryland in your own way.
The PSC and everybody in this state is very clear on where I stand. When I say we have to make sure that we are protecting ratepayers, that we have to make sure that we're being transparent in our process, it's the same exact reason when we watched when I stated out publicly my challenge with what we saw with the Piedmont process, where I said the problem was not just transmission line. We have to be able to create more energy assets. I think it's part of the reason that we're seeing here about what we're talking about before about supply and demand, and while we're watching rising costs, is we have to be able to do more so that we're not just consistently importing energy. We have to be able to create more energy generation within our own state, but there's a right way to do it. And you got to do it the right way, and that is with the community and with transparency. I do not believe in things like eminent domain.
Will the power line happen in Maryland?
The PSC is the one who's going to decide that, but as I've stated publicly before, unless there are changes to what we were talking about months ago, I think they're going to have a very difficult time making it happen.
Good answer. So, you know what? This country has rejected DEI, wokeism, transgenderism in this country. How does that impact you as governor moving forward on these issues?
I'm the governor of Maryland. I'm focused on the issues that are most important to the 6.5 million people in my state. The things that are most important to the people in my state are making sure that we can do things like reducing prescription drug costs. The thing that our people are focusing on are things like how can you reduce housing costs? And that's why I've introduced legislation that's the most aggressive housing package that any governor in the state of Maryland has released in recent history. that they want to make sure that we can have more affordable housing, that we can have an education system that's training our young people how not just to be employees, but employers. If you're not talking about something that impacts the 6.5 million people of my state, if you're not talking about something that's going to make sure that their quality of life is better and that we can decrease costs on them, then frankly, for me, it's just a distraction, and I just don't have time for it.
So let me come back to this. So the BG&E bills in Maryland have just doubled. That certainly is having an impact.
Absolutely. No, and it's frustrating. And listen, and here's the thing, people have to understand, like, you know who I'm also hearing these calls from? My mother, who lives in Anne Arundel County, my cousins, who live in Prince George's County and Charles County. So this is not something that's just a Baltimore issue. It's something that we're not just seeing as a Maryland issue. We are watching increased costs for energy that's happening all around the country. And if you think about PJM and then these other platforms, they don't just deal with Maryland. We're talking about a 13-state coalition that all these states are dealing with it. And I do think that places like PJM, part of the challenge we've had is there should have been a greater measure of preparation.
Did you not meet with them?
Well, we met with them recently, absolutely.
What happened?
Well, I told them exactly how I feel on this issue. Okay. That more needs to be done, and frankly, more needed to be done years ago. Part of the issue that we're having is this is a long-term problem that has not been dealt with. I am so tired of the can kicking that exists when it comes to basic policies that mean that the people of our state lose because we keep kicking cans down the road, and that is something I've said in my administration, we don't can kick.
Have you met with the MPRP people who are against it?
I've not met with them.
Will you?
I have no problem meeting with anybody and everybody, absolutely.
So, in your state address, you referenced the two storms facing Maryland, one of which is the Trump administration. I hinted on that as we were going out to break. And I talked about you're handling the new directives from Washington. You've previously said that Maryland's localities should follow the Constitution, as you just mentioned, when it comes to integration. What does that mean in practical terms? And when you think about with over 160,000 federal employees right here in Maryland, how will your administration prepare for possible restructuring of federal agencies under President Trump and his administration? Well,
one thing we've seen, and just last week, our Department of Labor actually released a website with showing people if there's employment challenges that you were having because you were a federal employee and now lost your jobs, that there's resources that you can tap into and go into. But to be clear, this is real. Mm-hmm. And it's not just real, it's unnecessary and it's unfortunate. Because if you are serious about government efficiency, watch what we're doing in the state of Maryland. That you're actually able to be efficient with government, you're actually able to decrease the size of government, which we've now done 3 years in a row, decrease the size of our general fund, but do it in a way that actually promotes growth, do it in a way that actually increases labor force participation, do it in a way that focuses on educational attainment and training people for not just the jobs of now and the jobs of the future. There's ways to do this. There's a smart way to do governance and a data-driven way to do governance. And I really believe that that people should pay attention to what we're doing here in Maryland to get a better idea.
It wouldn't surprise you that I have an opportunity to talk to both Democratic and Republican elected officials. And many Republican legislatures have noted that you, Governor Moore, are very open to dialogue on a range of issues, even if you don't need their votes. Which brings me to bipartisanship. Why is that so important to you?
It's all I've ever known. I don't come from politics. I don't come from a political family. I don't come from a political background. I'm an Army guy. And you know a question I never once asked my soldiers? What's your political party? It never came up when I was leading soldiers in Afghanistan, risking my life next to people who were risking theirs. When I was running one of the largest poverty-fighting organizations in this country, or when I was running a business, you know what I never asked any of my coworkers or customers? How'd you vote in the last election? It didn't come up. I just believe that this whole idea of how you have to be so consumed by your political party, it's just so shallow-minded. Anyone who simply thinks that a political party has all the right answers is frankly not thinking hard enough.
Hold that point, Governor. Governor Wes Moore, the governor of your state of Maryland, is our guest, and we'll be back. You know, Governor Eric Barron's his resignation as the U.S. Attorney of Maryland, how devastating is that loss?
It's disappointing. We had a great partnership with Eric Barron and the U.S. Attorney. We're one of the only states in the country that actually funded the U.S. Attorney out of our balance sheet. That actually shows the level of belief I have in Eric Barron and what the U.S. Attorney was able to do under his leadership. I think between the partnership we have between the U.S. Attorney, between the mayor, between the state's attorneys in both Baltimore City and also in other jurisdictions to include Prince George, we've been able to watch historic drops in violence. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you have the right team. It happens because you have the right instructions. It happens because you have the right partnership and the right accountability. And so Eric Barron is going to be missed from this role.
You know, I saw a tweet today where you endorsed Aisha Braveboy.
I did.
That was a little shocker.
Well, you know, listen, I don't just respect the partnership that we have with her and her ability to be able to work in close coordination, to be able to drive really important results and important trend lines that we've seen when it comes to violence in Prince George's County. But also, I believe in her vision for where Prince George's County can go. You know, we have a shared belief that we need to drive towards a focus of work, wages, and wealth. Work, wages, wealth. And she has a shared vision on that. And so it had nothing to do with the other people, you know, many of whom I know and have a deep amount of respect for. But I'm excited to have the opportunity to be able to not just help the state's attorney become the next county executive, but also be able to be a good partner with her when she moves to the county executive seat. You know,
here's what I find fascinating about that. I got to have a little fun with this. I know she's not Senator Angela Also Brooks' candidate, and it would have been easy for you to go the establishment, but you showed a principled position on what is best for Prince George's County. You did not play politics with this. You made a decision on what you felt was most effective for Prince George's County.
I don't play politics.
How difficult is that?
Maybe for other people. For me, I don't play politics, and I have a deep amount of respect for Senator Alsobrooks. I think she has been a fantastic addition to our delegation. I was proud to campaign for her. I was proud of the campaign she ran, and she won by, I think, 12 points in the race, so it wasn't even close. But I also know that when I'm thinking about how I work with partners and how I think about what I want and what I need, I knew that State's Attorney Aisha Braveboy was the person who I wanted to see as the next county executive of Prince George's County.
Well, I don't think there's anybody you endorsed so far that has lost. All yours are winners.
We're doing pretty well.
You know, I just saw your poll numbers at 59%. Yeah. It's amazing. The voters really have a lot of confidence and trust in you as their governor.
Well, you know, I think, and you know, listen, I don't spend time, you know, dwelling over poll numbers. But I do know this, is that it believes that the people of the state believe that the direction that we are moving in together is the right direction, that we're honest and that we're trustworthy and that we are data driven and that we're of the people. And I think about it where, you know, it wasn't a political party that got me into this office or into this seat. It was the people. The people decided that I should be the 63rd governor of the state of Maryland. And I think it's something, it's a promise we made to them that we're holding true to.
So I'm going to go to the Baltimore Sun's website, take a few of these questions. You know, Charles Kringle, he says, Governor Moore, you keep saying we're asking the wealthiest Marylanders to pay a small tax increase, but asking means they can say no. Isn't this a forced increase?
No, listen, well, first, I'm going to thank Charles for the comment and for the question. It's not a forced increase, and I'm actually not sure exactly what that means, but what we're basically saying is this. We need to have a tax system that is simpler, fairer, pro-growth, and for the vast majority of Marylanders, lower. That I don't go anywhere around the state and anyone looks at me and says, oh, I think the tax system in Maryland makes sense. Nobody says that, no matter where in the state of Maryland that you call home. And so by doing things like doubling the standard deduction, by doing things like eliminating the standard deduction penalty, by doing things like cutting the corporate tax rate, by doing things like making Maryland not be the only state in the country that has both an inheritance tax and an estate tax, which makes absolutely no sense. By doing things like making sure we can put more money back in the pocket of everyday Marylanders. And that includes giving 2/3 of all Marylanders a tax cut. 82% of Marylanders will either see a tax cut or see no change at all. This is about having a tax system that is simpler, fairer, pro-growth, and for the vast majority of Marylanders, lower.
You know, let me go here again. You know, the governor is my friend. I've known the governor for a long time, and I make no bones about the respect I have for the governor. You know, in all our conversations, I've never heard you once talk about any ambitions for running for president, that you're the heir to the Democratic Party. Your focus is always on Marylanders. I saw you on Ruben's show. It just keeps coming up. I want to give you a chance. Listen, if you don't deliver for Maryland, if you don't give relief to people who are suffering, everything about any kind of career you have is contingent on how well you produce and deliver for the people in Maryland.
And I think it's important for people to understand, like, I didn't come up in this. Listen, I'm a guy who saw my dad die when I was young. I went to a 2-year college. There's nothing about my life that said, oh, this guy's gonna be a governor one day. My mother didn't get her first job that gave her benefits until I was 14 years old. I mean, I feel like I'm playing with house money right now. I'm having the time of my life. And I'm doing a job that I love for people that I love. And this is a really complicated and hard time for many people in our state. A lot of people are scared. A lot of people are uncertain. And I'm just a big believer that God puts us in places that He's prepared us for. And right now, God has put each and every one of us in a space and in a seat that we're prepared to meet this moment of crisis with courage. And so I love the work we are doing. And I love my state and I love Marylanders. And I'm excited about the chance to make this Maryland's decade and to know that I can be at the, I can be at the helm of making that happen.
What do you see as your most pressing challenges? Because this is a critical year for you and for Marylanders.
I think the most important thing we've got to do is grow. That's why our main focus is the growth agenda. That's why our main focus is making sure that we are investing in industries that we have a unique chance of winning at, being able to leverage places like Johns Hopkins University and Morgan State University and the University of Maryland College Park, being able to leverage the fact that we have U.S. Cyber Command in the state of Maryland, Fort Meade in the state of Maryland, the U.S. Naval Academy in the state of Maryland, Andrews Air Force Base in the state of Maryland. By being able to leverage Maryland's unique assets and invest in them wisely, by being able to do procurement reform, by being able to do permitting reform, regulatory reform, make it easier for businesses to be able to come and grow in the state of Maryland, by giving tax relief to middle-class families and giving a greater chance for more middle-class and working families to keep their money inside of their pockets, and making sure that we can streamline our process and get our economic engine going.
But why are you still meddling with the Washington Commanders in Maryland when they should be in Washington, D.C.? Why? Why can't you just let them go?
Because they should be in the state of Maryland. We have, listen, the state of Maryland is a place that not only do we have the most competitive...
But you have a pro football team, the Ravens.
Yes, and we like having two teams in the state of Maryland. And I think Maryland is big enough and bold enough to be able to lead and maintain with two teams. And so I'm very excited about the fact that Washington now that the Commanders now have a competitive football team. I'm looking forward to the day when we can have a Ravens-Commanders Super Bowl. It is going to be a very big deal, very complicated for me because both teams will be in the state of Maryland, so it'll be a complicating game, even though I'm a big-time Ravens fan.
Let me try to slip in one more. From the Adam, who's president of Maryland's for Better Wine and Law, said, "Why did you initially support bringing beer and wine to chain stores, but soften your stance once the session started?"
Adam, thank you so much. And there's nothing about my stance that is softened. We need to have beer and wine inside of grocery stores in the state of Maryland.
Richard Erb.
Well, let me just say
go ahead.
And there's a reason why I believe we need to have beer and wine inside of grocery stores. One, it's because as I'm going all around the state, this is an issue that people all around the state believe in. And we need to make sure that we're listening to the people. The second piece is this. We need to make sure that it's convenient for people. If you are going out and you're buying dinner for your family and you want to get a bottle of wine, you should not have to go in front of multiple different places to be able to go do that. We got to make it more convenient for Marylanders. The third reason, Maryland is one of only 3 states in the country that does not allow beer inside of grocery stores. We need to modernize and get more up to speed with other places. The fourth reason.
Oh, my goodness.
The fourth reason.
He's running out the clock on me.
The fourth reason why
That's
this
what he's doing,
becomes so
running out the
important.
clock.
Because this is important. Because for many people around our state, in order for them to go get a 6-pack or a bottle of wine, they have to go behind bulletproof glass to go do it. And it is fundamentally unfair that we are making people do that in order to go get beer or wine. That we have to be able to, this is a way of both making sure we can be fair and also get rid of the food deserts. Because why do you think it is that in many communities that you have an easier chance of finding a liquor store than a grocery store?
Why aren't we, this is from Richard Erb quickly, why aren't we building small nuclear plants in Maryland to replace the coal-fired plants being shuttered, Mr. Governor?
Listen, Richard, that we were talking about early on this show. I believe that we need to come up with additional assets to include nuclear as part of this larger conversation. And so this is, when we're talking about energy, it is simply a supply and a demand. We are watching increasing demand for energy assets. We need to increase our supply as well.
Governor, you're a piece of work. But we appreciate having you on today. Thank you always coming to our broadcast house to talk to the voters. It shows that you care. They may not always understand or agree with your answers, but at least you're willing to come and talk to the people that keep you in power.
Amen.
Thank you across the house.
God bless you.
So much for joining. Governor Wes Moore, we're out of this.